What is up, Colts Nation? It's your boy Justin at the Riding the Bench Colts Cast, back again on July 16th, meaning we are, 10 days away, right, from training camp, as Pat McAfee said in his ESPYs monologue. I'm no mathematist, right? But we are getting awfully close to training camp, which means before you know it, it's going to be the preseason, your fantasy drafts, right? Then the regular season, halfway through the season, all the way through the season. You're going to be 55 years old with 4 kids before you know it. But in the meantime, let's just talk about training camp that's right in front of us now. By the way, no offense to those of you who are 55 and have the 4 kids, but I'm speaking to those that are around my age. That's a far ways away for us, right? Time flies, right? But I digress. So the truth of the matter is that the Colts this year have far more questions than they do answers going into training camp. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, there's a lot of uncertainty around the Indianapolis Colts going into this season, following that tumultuous season, right? Now, that isn't necessarily a bad thing because there is talent that I think collectively as Colts Nation we like on this roster, but there is a lot that we don't know for sure about this roster. In fact, it is that very fact that led ESPN's Mike Clay, that snake, to say that the Colts are the worst roster in the AFC. Now, we could be up in arms about what Mike Clay had to say all we want. I, for one, think there's some level of nonsense. I'm calling a little bit of malarkey there, right? I think he's a fair weather observer and honestly does not know the Colts like me and some of the other people, you, right? Other people making content, all of us. But, you know, when you kind of zoom out and look at it as an outsider, I mean, I can see where it comes from, right? You know, especially as I've thought about it a little bit more, whether it's youth, injury, and experience, or all of the above, the fact remains that things are not crystal clear when it comes to these Indianapolis Colts. And I mean, that's actually, in trying to give a positive spin, part of what is so great about this season. You know, I say on this channel often, this is an absolutely wonderful time to be a fan of the Indianapolis Colts, because even with potential concerns about this roster going into the season, which we're about to get into, we still do have something to look forward to in the years 2024, 2025, so on and so forth, right? And that is a hell of a lot more than we could say about the past however many seasons. I mean, I think in the past few seasons, despite the fact that we were being sold a winner, most of us really didn't think that we were going to make a Super Bowl, right? Now, I'll be the first to admit, hand raised, I'm caught with my pants down. I thought that like divisional round last year was reasonable. I was kind of viewing some meaningful playoff football as my benchmark for success, because it's just a side note from the episode. I view the idea that you have to win the Super Bowl. Like, I understand that's always the goal, but you're talking about a fan base. There's 32 teams in the NFL, and only one of them wins it every year. For me, I'm happy as a fan if you're giving me meaningful playoff football. Now, of course, we'll have our gripes with that when that time comes and we deal with those things. But when you really look at it in like the macro sense, if you're like a perennial playoff contender and a team that's playing meaningful football, you can have it way worse. But back to the Colts topic, right? We have gotten a true injection of youth. That's really what makes it so beautiful this season, right? Of course, it all starts with Anthony Richardson, our beautiful knight in shining armor, right? But we can really apply this across the board. It's not just the quarterback position on this roster. I mean, the entire offense has been overhauled, right? With Shane Steichen, Jim Bob Cooter coming in. We got Cam Turner, Tony Soprano Jr. I know it's Soprano. I prefer to say Soprano, okay? Tony Soprano Jr. coming from football families, right? As well as being accomplished coaches in this league. The defense, horrifically young in some senses. But point being, again, we have far more questions than answers going into that season. So this episode is just going to be me briefly going through both sides of the ball and really trying to give you a better idea, if I can, as to what we have to be looking for as fans going into training camp, which, by the way, I will be attending August 5th, August 6th, taking a flight from New York, 800 miles away from Westfield, Indiana, representing the East Coast Colts fans. I will, of course, be bringing those takeaways that I get when I am there to this channel. So if you don't want to miss that, go ahead and subscribe. We are so close to 1,000 subscribers over here at Riding the Bench. So We would be very, very grateful if you could help us get there. Of course, if you have yet to like the video and you're enjoying what you're seeing so far, despite me tripping up on my words here and there, right? Please do so. That helps the cause more than you know, not just for this video, but for the channel as a whole, and not for anything. I mean, if you watch someone consistently, it is common YouTube etiquette to like their stuff, right? I mean, do you have manners or do you not, right? I'm kidding. I don't mean to isolate anyone, but let's get into the offensive side of the ball, right? So we could talk about the quarterback room, but we've talked about it ad nauseum, right? I mean, it's all the talk of the town in Colts Nation, right? But of course, we're still going to talk about it just a little bit, right? So the truth of the matter of this situation, and I keep saying this throughout the course of the episodes, despite the fact that many of you think you know that Anthony Richardson is going to start week 1, we don't even technically know right now who the starter is. There's nothing that's been announced, and we know that there's a quote-unquote battle. Now, I've been misconstrued on this channel. Make no mistake, I don't think that Gardner Minshew is going to start. I don't want Gardner Minshew to start technically. I'd root for him if he did. If I were to give a percentage, I'd say right now I'm probably about 70% Richardson and 30% Garner going into training camp in terms of who I think is going to be the starter. But make no mistake, I don't want it one way or another. I want what Shane Steichen wants, okay? So let me clarify that because I'm catching some flack for the way I'm talking about the starting quarterback situation, and it is what it is, right? But reports have been out there that they did look shaky a little bit during the OTAs. Now, of course, you can't make a mountain out of a molehill with some of the stuff that's going on early in the offseason, but you do take into account that we really don't collectively as Colts fans, as Colts Nation, right? We don't really trust our secondary as is. I'm not alone there, right? I mean, am I the only one? If not, you're asleep at the wheel, wake up, right? I mean, the secondary is in a spot where we might be in a world of trouble. I'm not 100% sure, but it might be. So when we have our quarterback struggling against that secondary, albeit without most of the main weapons of the offense being healthy, that does for me just hold a little bit more weight. It has my ears perking up just a little bit as something to pay attention to going into training camp. So that's the quarterback situation in a nutshell. You look at the offensive line. We still have studs, or who we think are studs, all over this offensive line. The big question, of course, though, comes from the fact that they vastly underperformed last year and really, under the surface, have been a little shoddy in pass protection in the past few years. Now, think about the quarterbacks we've had. You have Phillip Rivers, who was a statue, and I don't think the sack total was high that year. I think that was fine. But you look at Wentz. He's the type of guy, you take a lot of sacks when you have a quarterback like Wentz, and then that goes to the offensive line. And then last year, Matt Ryan was standing in quicksand, right? I mean, the guy couldn't run for anything. No disrespect to Matt, but the dude couldn't run. I mean, what do you want? He probably ran like a 6'6", 40 going into last season. That's neither here nor there. But can the offensive line regain the form that they had? Can they perform to the level that we want them to, that we expect them to, that we think they can? Now, for me, when you look at this roster, personally, personal note, of all the concerns I have about the Indianapolis Colts going into training camp, going into this season, the offensive line is like the last thing I am worried about. We have the continuity, right? Last season, the second half of the year, we were much better. We are bringing, at least as it currently stands, injuries aside, right? Fingers crossed. Oh, we still haven't heard any news about any crazy stuff outside of Daniel Scott, of course. I might be missing someone. I shouldn't have said that. Besides the point, the offensive line is healthy, right? The offensive line is healthy right now, and this is the unit that was performing better, right? You have Bernard Raymond on the left side of the line, left tackle, Quentin Nelson, Ryan Kelly, Will Fries, and then Braden Smith on the right side of the ball. That, for me, sounds pretty good, right? That sounds good to me. Of course, we have no questions about Jonathan Taylor running behind them. I suppose the big question is left tackle, right guard. Will Fries particularly. I trust Bernard Raymond. I think you should too. Pro Football Focus, for what it's worth, I think had him inside the top 7 offensive tackles in football, period, last year in the second half of the season. And of course, he had his growing pains, but that kid to me is a stud. I mean, this is the best left tackle work we have gotten since Anthony Costanzo. So I am all in on Bernard Raymond. Right guard we'll have to figure out, but I think if there's 4 guys that you can really trust on that offensive line, and then a guy in Tony Soprano Jr., who we really trust, a football family, Quentin Nelson loves him. For me, I'm just not too concerned about this offensive line. Obviously, last year, we tried to fill in Matt Pryor at left tackle. Filling in right guard with Will Fries isn't exactly the same thing as doing something like that at left tackle. It's a little bit less important. Not that each individual piece isn't important, but right guard, the inconsistencies at that position aren't going to be quite as obvious as something as left tackle when you look at the on-the-field product, right? So there's that. Now, wide receiver. We like our guys, right? You talk about Pittman, you talk about Downs, you talk about Alec Pierce, right? But is someone here going to step up outside of Michael Pittman as a legitimate week to week, not just a guy who can play? We're talking a week to week threat that opposing defenses are going to have to plan for in their meetings. That's what the Colts need out of this receiving corps, because Pittman is very good. That was a weird thing to say, very well. Pittman's very good. I know a lot of you are kind of down on Pittman just a little bit. He's great. He's one of the better receivers in football. I'd go as far as to say easily inside of the top 20. That's worth something, right? I think he's been hurt by the fact that he hasn't had a consistent threat on the other side of him, and the quarterback play has been spotty. We haven't been able to get the ball down the field, all these things. If one of these guys can step up and take some of the pressure off Pittman, where you're really keeping opposing defenses guessing as to where you're going with the ball, that's going to go a long way, not just helping Pittman and helping this offense, right? So I'm looking at Downs, I'm looking at Pierce, and I'm really looking at all of them. Isaiah McKenzie, right? Or the whole bunch of guys. I'm looking at everyone. Someone has to step up in this receiving corps as someone that we know week in and week out is going to get targeted, that the opposing defense really has to know as a part of this Colts game plan. I think that's a key, a huge key, an underrated key to this offensive success this year. So I wanted to bring that up. Tight end. We have so many tight ends, but the theme here is that we just don't know who's going to step up, right? I mean, how many positions can we say this about? And we'll go on to the defense. It's going to be much of the same thing. Tight end, we think Jelani Woods is going to start. I mean, the kid's a freak, right? Jelani Woods is a monster. I mean, 6'7", 260 some pounds. Now he's dealing with a hamstring. That's a legitimate concern for me at his size. Hamstrings tend to linger. Not an easy injury. It only gets harder the bigger you get, right? So for me, that's something to pay attention to. I don't want to predict per se that hamstring's going to linger, but they're going to have to take care of that one. That's going to be tough to deal with. So I'm looking at Jelani Woods, Kylan Granson, the kid Mallory we drafted, a nice one, Mo Ali Cox. We'll have to see. I think he's fighting against his contract right now that they gave him. I think he's a pretty serious candidate to get cut, but we'll see how it goes. Maybe he balls out, right? But we have to see who's going to step up in this tight end room, because, again, we think we know. Just like we think we know that Anthony Richardson is going to start, we think we know that Jelani Woods is going to start. But I don't know how many times in the NFL we have to be reminded that just when you think you know something to be true, we just don't know for sure. The NFL, football has a very funny way of reminding you and putting you in your place as to, well, we don't really know what we're talking about, right? So the tight end room, again, more questions, no answers. We like some of the talent, but we're going to have to see what happens there. Now, the defensive side of the ball, this defensive line I want to start with, because this is the unit I'm looking at this year. When you talk about this defense having any chance at being one of, like the top half of the league as a defense, it's going to take this defensive line, and it has a chance to be a major, major strength of this team. But again, we're looking at guys like Kwity Paye, who so far hasn't proven that he's a bona fide, legitimate pass rusher in this league week in and week out, right? Dion Dangbo's a guy who started to come on after the Achilles. Very, very, very tough injury. It's a bear, right? Maybe one of the worst injuries in terms of sports athletics that you can get outside of like your arm getting amputated or dying, right? I mean, the Achilles is a big deal. So we're going to see how he comes back from that. It was looking like he was on the right track last year. And then Samson had become who we signed. So you got those three. If those three can give us work on the defensive line with what we already believe we know, and I think as close to 100% as it gets, we know what we're going to get out of Buckner and Grover Stewart, this has a chance to be one of the top 5 pass rushing units in the NFL. That sounds silly right now, but I promise you it's not. It's something to keep tabs on, because as training camp goes on and we see reports and we start to know and feel like we know just a little bit more out of what we're going to see out of some of these guys like Paye, Dio Dangbo, Samson Ebukam, once we feel like we understand that a little bit better, I'll be willing to take that stand. I'm almost there right now. The Colts pass rush has a chance to be a problem this year, but this is a chance, right? Again, it's a question mark as to whether or not some of these guys are going to produce. That's the theme of our team this year. I think linebacker is another one. I know people don't want to hear me talk about Shaquille Leonard. I've been talking about Shaquille Leonard and my concerns with this injury for months on end now, ad nauseum, right? Like the quarterback situation. And I know there's a couple of you in the comments that don't like it, but now are you starting to see it? Are your glasses on? Have you woken up yet? Sound the alarms on Darius Leonard. Oh, Shaquille. Sound the alarms on Shaquille Leonard just a little bit, right? Because Jim Irsay, who's a guy who's a straight shooter, say what you want. I just went on a scathing rant about Jim Irsay, who I love, by the way. No hard feelings, Jim. I love the guy. he tells the truth, right? Jim Irsay tells the truth, or what he at least believes to be the truth. He showed that he has very, very little confidence in his lack of willingness to give any concrete information, just like everybody, on when on when Shaquille Leonard, I am sorry. One day I'm going to figure that out. It's hard. It's hard, right? It's Shaquille Leonard. I don't mean any disrespect by it. It's going to be hard to really have any confidence in Shaquille Leonard starting the season because there's just nothing on the timetable here. But at least in Jim Irsay's uncertainty, as we get closer, I at least feel like I have my answer, and it's not the one I want, and it's that we should not hold our hopes out to see Shaquille Leonard. That's the big question in the linebacking core. EJ Speed, of course, has to perform. Zaire Franklin, we know, is a freak of nature, a stud, a monster. Love Zaire, homegrown guy. These are my favorite types of people on the Colts. Now, I just had some steak and eggs, and I'm like burping it up right now. You're going to see this. I'm not editing it out. So the secondary. Oh, my goodness, the secondary. So where do we start? Now, there's a possibility. Let me give the positive spin on the secondary. Juju Brents is still dealing with that injury. He got the surgically repaired. I have notes in front of me. I did not put the note. Is it his elbow or so? It's something with his arm, right? His bicep, his tricep, his elbow, something like that. Juju Brents, we don't know what he's going to bring. We've got nothing. It's possible if we had seen him in OTAs, we would already know. Again, he can be a big deal, right? And he has the size. People talk about the speed. Listen, it's not like he's Matt Ryan out there, right? The guy can run a little bit. His speed is maybe not elite at that position, but he's not horrifically slow, and he's got the size of these dudes like Richard Sherman. Of course, the Gus Bradley connection, right? We can make that a million times. When you are a guy who's not moving fast, but you have great ball skills like a Julius Brents, you have a chance to have some real success because the way you could counteract some of that speed, and trust me, I'm no corner, but the way you could counteract some of that speed is to get your hands on the guy at the line of scrimmage and kind of throw him off his track a little bit. That and having great ball skills and that length and that size is going to make up for some of the speed because he has more range. His body can make up more space, even if maybe the guy has a step on him, right? So Juju Brents, it's possible that this is like not a concern at all, the secondary, because I think with him, all of a sudden you put him in there if he has a big rookie campaign, and now you have Kenny Moore and some of these pieces around, then you're kind of looking at a secondary that might not be too bad, at least in the corner room, and really the safeties as well. It maybe not in the top half of the league, but around average, right? I think we could pull that off. But again, we don't know. We have seen like none of these guys play. We know Kenny Moore, and we know that he struggled last year. Now, we're going to give Kenny Moore the benefit of the doubt. I don't know if there's a scheme fit issue in Gus Bradley's defense. But if he is to not perform, and then we just look at all these questions around the secondary, this right here is the unit that I'm absolutely most concerned about. I'm going to have a keen eye on this unit when I go in the training camp because someone's got to step up. Darius Rush, I hear, moves around like a freak of nature. I hear he pops off the field. I'd like to see what he brings to the table. Juju Brents, again, has a chance, although he's behind on reps. Very important for rookies, but not out of the question that he comes in and has a nice impact for us. Look at a Tariq Woolen, who I think was a 6th-rounder for the Seahawks last year. And I know he's faster than Juju Brents, but in terms of the size, right, Juju has a chance. Lots of questions on this secondary. Curious to hear what you guys think about the secondary specifically if you've made it to this point in the episode because I'm incredibly concerned. I've said this before. But we're getting close to the time where we're going to have some answers. You look at the safeties, right? Julian Blackmon. This is a guy who was amazing before he also tore his Achilles and came back last year. Wasn't quite the same, but that's really an injury that takes a year to be able to get into the activity. And then really even closer to 2 years to get back to the form where you really feel like you're 100% and have that confidence, right? For most people, at least, of course. Julian Blackmon really has a chance to become a bona fide star in this league if he's to put together a big season for the Colts right now. We're relying on him. But it's even he, who I consider to be one of the more sure pieces of this defense, is a question mark going into the season. Rodney Thomas, 7th-round pick last year, 6th round? He might as well have been a 3rd or a 2nd with he was spectacular, particularly for his draft capital last year. But he's another guy we're relying on heavily. We let Rodney McLeod go. It's all of these young guys, right? I'm going to try to wrap up the episode because I'm rambling on just a little bit. We have a lot of this youth here, right? And we can like youth all we want, but the thing is that we just don't know. But the beauty of the season is that even if things go south, we have enough youth on this roster, particularly at the quarterback position, the most important position on the field, to feel hopeful going forward. It's not like the past few seasons or really the past decade where if we sucked that year, it was a massive disappointment because we were kind of in this quote unquote win now mode. I think, in hindsight, we could say maybe we hadn't been there the past couple years, but we were certainly being sold a winner, right? Now we know what the expectation is, and it's to get better, improve, whatever that looks like, right? So with that, I'm going to wrap up the episode. Hopefully that was concise. I can't tell if it was concise as I was talking. I don't know. But the whole point was that I wanted to just kind of give a brief overview of the rosters. Where are the questions? What can we trust going into training camp? That was the point of the episode. So until next time, my name is Justin. You just listened to the Ride in the Bench Colts cast. Go Colts.